I think now we try to bring back we're not all on the same stage, but the equivalent of bringing us all together on the same stage to talk about things, and maybe even to start with that question, because I am curious how people feel about that. Well, sort of Lars brought up two kind of elements of performance. One that we wanted to talk about. One was visibility, the sort of visibility of the performer, or presence, sort of human presence of the performer, and then the other is this kind of question of what's unpredictable in a performance. And I was sort of curious, like, well, I guess starting on the physical plane for Isabel and Olivia, how important that feeling is to you, maybe even as an audience member, of the whether the presence of the performer is central all of the time, or whether sometimes you're happy if the performer is invisible.
Yeah, I think in my case, my main interest in departing from theater architectures was very much about how could live performance be experienced as a landscape or as an immersive field. So where a situation where the performer could also sometimes take a peripheral position, actually, in terms of attention of the public, and where the public might feel but actually not see that presence. So for me, I work in live presence and sculpting live presence, but let's say the centrality of the performer as a spectacle is not as interesting to me as the potential for the performer to exist as like part of a larger environment in relation to the objects or other people or elements of installation and space. And for me, that shift was conceptually, for me, was stopping to think about the performer as this spectacle of performance and rather as the host of a situation, or even the host of someone's experience of their physical presence.
Well, we talk about that a lot in 100 years ago when we used to go to clubs, but in club music, right, that's this question of whether people should be staring at the DJ. And even before any of these things happened, the way that kind of social platforms work, or streaming things work, or or Instagram or whatever it is, that kind of shifted some of that focus onto the sort of DJ persona in ways that maybe it wasn't there before. So I'm kind of curious how you sort of how you recenter. Well, I think that's a question for you too, because this has even come up with some of your performances. How you sort of recenter the audience.
I mean, I think for me, in different contexts, in both things mattered. The kind of the unpredictability of what the performer is doing and what is happening live, and also the context in which this is happening. So yeah, I don't think I have one answer to that in this way. Like maybe a club is an example where sort of the energy and everything of the kind of exchange of energy and smells and sights of everyone who's come to this space is really important to me in terms of how I experience the sound that's happening in that. Whereas maybe like a symphony or something, I'm more content to watch what's happening, but it still feels kind of important to me that all of these performers have come together and made this, that there's some sort of unpredictability and kind of, I don't know how else to describe it other than like energy or something, but maybe it's good to dissect this more. But so I think it's like two things, that sound exists in a context, and then also when there is kind of unpredictability, or at least I perceive that something seems to be happening live that can be exciting.
I always had the opposite feeling of the orchestra. They were the least interesting thing to me. Also, because we had like a very futuristic hall, so the hall looked very futuristic and space age, and then the music to me as a kid was like mind blowing. And then you kind of look at a stage and you just see a bunch of people who look kind of like stagehands, like dressed in black, and it's like for the first few minutes they're interesting to watch. Like by hour two, there's not really a lot like to look at in the oboe player anymore. I don't know. So I'm curious, actually, to beam back to Rebecca, because not necessarily that you were always the person dealing with this, but since you were dealing with the artists you were collaborating with, some people I can imagine were really very interested in how visible they were, like knowing Marco Donnarumma. I think his visibility was really important. But I wonder, usually when people look at those kind of performing instruments, they think about the audience perspective, or what, like my complaints with the oboe player, how visible things look to the audience. But I wonder if for some of the people using tools like Wekinator or now Sound Control, is that about how the way that they look to other people, or is that also about them kind of transforming into something else when they're able to play these instruments?
Yeah, I think again, it varies widely for different people, but absolutely, some of the folks who've used Wekinator, that the space of possibilities of movements and interactions that they're able to inhabit on a stage, become part of the performance, not just, as you mentioned, in the way that they're visually connecting with an audience, but shaping the way that they think about the musical possibilities that they're going to engage in. But I also think there's another very important consideration that I alluded to in my talk, but it's worth foregrounding here, is that so much of the music that I perform, and many of the collaborators I've worked with are also doing, it's not just solo shows, right? You may have multiple people on stage who are collaborating with each other, and that is often so important, not just to the literal sounds that get produced or the experience of the audience, but the the energy in the room, the kinds of relationships that you take with your co-improvisers or collaborators, from from the stage to beyond the stage. I mean, you've got to be able to communicate with each other and effectively coordinate and maybe improvise together, and that's a whole other set of important considerations where instruments have a big influence.
Yeah, I would imagine that the sort of demand for collaboration and working together in the same space is also going to be really, really high. Thinking out 12 months in the future, that maybe people will be less interested in kind of solo stuff all the time. It'll be interesting to see. But I mean, this also relates to the stuff that you're doing, Olivia, with your environments. It can be quite collaborative. I'm not sure what my question is here, but part of what's going on is really about the ability of, I mean, part of what was going on was even for people to see each other's code makes a big difference in these sort of kind of computer-based tasks that had been sort of antisocial, right?
Yeah, both seeing each other's code, and then I think also with Hydra, like the potential, it's a form of collaboration, or just using what someone else is doing as kind of an input for what you're doing. And I think at some point it's almost just a collaborative jam, and I don't know at what point it becomes a performance or something. And sometimes I feel like I kind of set up these interesting contexts, but it only makes sense to you if you're actually kind of like jamming with it or something. And maybe this is a question for Isabel or something, is when is something a performance, or when is it something just an event, or when is it not a performance?
Yeah, well, I was also very interested I feel like in each presentation there was so much about kind of alternative forms of sociality, whether it was like between interhuman sociality or between software and human. So these alternative modes of sociality, I think, are very compelling and exciting to think about. And I think for me, there is something that happens when there's a difference for me between the preciousness of that alternative sociality happening and unfolding, but there's also, let's say that there's a moment for me where it can become composition, or where we attend to the jam as, or maybe certain conditions or certain decisions are made that mostly has to do with like what's the perspective that you're wanting to generate actually, or for whom, or how is it shaped or framed, and for whom and when. So I think there is a foggy line, and I think it can also be shifting. But for me, composition then is perhaps a form of care, a certain set of decision making that means that you're accountable or responsible somehow for, even if it's an open structure which develops randomness and unpredictability, as I think all of us seem to be also working in that sense, creating flexible structures of composition that exceed our ability to control every single thing that happens in it. There's like space for emergence, but nonetheless, I consider us the hosts of these situations. When we then start to compose, we are accountable and responsible somehow for what goes down.
Yeah, what is the process like? I mean, and so as we saw these different performance configurations, you had different groups of collaborators and you had different scenarios. How do you go about kind of developing what seems kind of like sort of site and collaborator specific performance scenarios? Or what's that process like?
Well, interestingly, I think game structures come into play quite a lot, having a set of parameters that all players or performers share, a certain, let's say, a basis of knowledge, a basis of research, perhaps a basis of movement vocabulary as well. But then how to employ or how to decide to initiate a particular sequence at a particular time is often really tuned in to the presence of the public, how they choose to position themselves in space, how they move, or how they may enter or exit. So actually, game structures play a really important role in how we collaboratively compose the situation.
I mean, we did wind up with these kind of restrictions that are cut off most solutions. But I kind of imagine the coming weeks that we may have more different kind of environments to adapt to. So actually, I wanted to ask as my last question of everybody, since we are having this conversation between the past and the future, what would your ideal next performance configuration be in say 15 words or less? First, going to the internet, maybe to Lars. A crash, maybe.
Personally, I built the software not for net performances, and I'm still not passionate about it. I like streaming, but I'm not passionate about it. So I have to say none.
Oh, but at least being back in an offline situation then. Getting off the stream, but using these things with the audience, it sounds like. I guess.
Yeah,
yeah.
like software or computers. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just going to say one more thing. Like software and computers are interesting, but I think the net is so limited. And I've been into streaming for a long, long time, and I don't think that it offers much. I think we're just in the beginning of this, and it's kind of like very limiting.
Yeah. I expect you're preaching to the choir, even though there's not really a choir here, but maybe that sort of proves the point. So, Rebecca, I don't know what's next for you. It's some of the stuff you're working with, or the ideal next kind of scenario.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff I'm working on at the moment is very much tied to this question of how we can make some of the currently cutting edge deep learning techniques interactive enough to be playful, and actually we're building some online tools that take a lot of inspiration from things like Hydra, by the way, in thinking about. Boy, aren't we lucky that we've been thinking about how to support online synchronized collaboration in creative code. But at the same time, I think thinking to the future, it will be nice to not have to be tied to virtual only collaboration. And as soon as you asked that question, my mind went back to something that Isabel mentioned about the engagement with different forms of sociality, I think, in the projects that each of us are doing. And I'll be honest, I mean, I think for the last 4 months, I've been missing so much the kinds of communal experiences that I have with my friends and my colleagues and my students. And so much of that even more so than revolving around music and art as shared experiences, it's revolved around food as shared experiences. We've got Thanksgiving coming up for all of us Americans, and I just like, I don't know, you asked this question and my mind went to like, taking all of the buffets that I've literally been dreaming about and the potlucks that I've literally been dreaming about and thinking about, wow, wouldn't that be great to just do music making and sharing a bunch of food in the same space. That's where my dream is, as soon as possible.
That sounds good. Yeah. Yes, please. I don't know, Olivia, Isabel, anything to add to that? Or we should go break for dinner.
That sounds great. I mean, maybe. I mean, I feel like I've just finished like living a really huge dream of this exhibition that happened in Kunsthalle Zurich, a scalable skeletal escalator that inhabited 3 floors, 3 architectural levels with installation, daily performance, and music. Multiple collaborators addressing all the senses. It was a kind of a massive production. So I think my dream, at the moment for my something next as a format-wise, is perhaps something as intimate as a 1-on-1, 1-for-1 performance that maybe also has a different sense of temporality, perhaps different than an exhibition visit or different than also a theater performance. I'm not sure exactly how long or how short, like I imagine yet, but something that comes back to some basics, just like human interrelation and potential for experimentation and play in that kind of intimate and most likely distanced scenario.
Your answer should be Music Maker's Hack Lab, no?
I think for me, I always have like a billion projects up my sleeve, unfinished in terms of, I really just like making kind of creative or art toys that other people use, but I don't have a habit of finishing them. But in terms of my own performance practice, I'm quite exhausted from screens at the moment, and so I think Rebecca's idea of food it's really
Food sounds good.
resonates with me a lot, and I think I'm kind of refinding what that could be in the future because I don't know right now.
Well, our wonderful crew and team here are probably hungry, so we'll call it a break here. Everybody in the audience, we can all go download Wekinator and Sound Control and check out Hydra in a browser and start playing with stuff. And maybe you can talk to our future us's who are there at the same time as you in the future, possibly watching this to answer other questions. But Lars, Rebecca, Isabel, Olivia, thanks so much, and thanks for this conversation. I feel really grateful for it. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us. Have a good day, morning, evening, or whatever it is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.